History often remembers the Persian Empire for its grand architecture and vast conquests. But beneath the gold and marble lay a legal system designed to break the human spirit in ways that defy imagination. In 401 BCE, King Artaxerxes II faced a crisis that demanded a punishment so horrific it would become legendary even in an era accustomed to brutality. The target was a soldier named Mithridates, a man who had committed the ultimate transgression. He had killed the king's brother, Cyrus, during the heat of battle. While a warrior might expect a swift execution, Artaxerxes had something far more calculated in mind. He commanded that Mithridates suffer Scaphism, a method specifically engineered to prolong death beyond what seemed humanly possible. Today, we examine the archives of this 17-day descent into a living nightmare, the design of the boats. Scaphism was rarely used, even by Persian standards, reserved only for the most hated enemies of the state. The name itself comes from the Greek word for hollowed out, referring to the instruments of the execution. The process began with Mithridates being stripped naked and bound securely between two hollowed-out wooden boats of equal size. These boats were placed one on top of the other, forming a wooden shell that encased his torso like a coffin. Precisely cut holes allowed his head, arms, and legs to protrude, while the rest of his body was sealed inside with metal clasps. This shell was not meant to kill him, but to create a private, inescapable chamber for his own biological collapse. The fatal banquet, milk and honey. Once the wooden tomb was sealed, the executioners turned to a deceptive form of torture, force-feeding. Mithridates was forced to consume a mixture of milk and honey. They poured the thick, sweet liquid down his throat until his stomach distended painfully. The cruelty did not end with ingestion. The same sticky substance was then smeared liberally over his exposed face, hands, and feet. This was a deliberate invitation to the natural world to begin the consumption of the living general. He was then carried to a stagnant marsh and left under the unforgiving Persian sun. The arrival of the swarm. In the stagnant waters of the marsh, the heat intensified the scent of the honey and the milk. Within hours, the mixture on his skin began attracting a relentless swarm of insects. Mithridates remained conscious as flies landed on his face, eventually crawling into his nose, ears, and mouth. He could feel them walking across his open eyes, but with his arms pinned by the wooden clasps, he was helpless to brush them away. This was the beginning of his body becoming a living ecosystem for parasites. The internal rot, an inescapable chamber. The milk and honey served a secondary, more disgusting purpose. They caused violent diarrhea. Because his torso was sealed inside the wooden boats, the waste collected and pooled around his body. This fetid matter quickly became a breeding ground for maggots and flies. By the second day, insects began laying eggs in his ears, nostrils, and the excrement-soaked wooden tomb. The boats had transformed from a coffin into an incubator for the very creatures that were eating him alive. The guards' mercy, forced survival. One of the most agonizing aspects of Scaphism was that Mithridates was not allowed to die of thirst or hunger. To ensure his horror lasted as long as possible, guards returned to the marsh daily. They continued to force-feed him the milk and honey mixture, preventing the mercy of dehydration or starvation. His lucidity was his greatest enemy. He remained fully aware as he felt the maggots and burrowing insects moving beneath his skin, consuming him from the inside out. His exposed skin, now severely sunburned and swollen, provided dozens of entry points for the parasites. The 17-day biological collapse. Mithridates survived for a staggering 17 days. Throughout this time, the internal rot continued to expand. The insects were not just on him, they were in him. Every breath he took was filled with the stench of his own decaying waste and the humming of the flies that lived in his throat. His body finally surrendered on the 17th day, not from a single wound, but from the total failure of his systems as they were systematically harvested by nature. When the boats were finally opened, the records indicate that the man had been largely replaced by the swarm. Conclusion: the record of Scaphism. The story of Mithridates and the boats remains one of the darkest records in the history of capital punishment. It was a death designed to prove that the king's reach extended beyond life, into a realm of pure, unadulterated suffering. At Last Breath Records, we remember these moments not to glorify the violence, but to record the sheer resilience of the human body and the depths of human cruelty. Mithridates' final breath was not a warrior's cry, but a quiet, parasitic whisper in a Persian marsh.